Distinguished Faculty Speaker Series. We hold this series the first Monday of every month at 3:30. And I'm very happy to have Dean George Stover here to introduce our speaker. George?
Yes. Yeah.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to introduce my Mason Gross colleague, Tom Nozkowski, a highly respected artist. Tom has been a member of the Visual Arts faculty since 2000, and he's been a key figure in building our painting studio into one of the most distinguished in America. It has been said of the painter Pierre Bonnard that he was well aware of the radical changes going on around him in the art world of his day, but he was content to quietly follow his own path. Since the 1970s, Tom Nozkowski has followed his own path. Working with small paintings on canvas board, he produces jewel-like abstractions that engage both the senses and the mind. Along the way, he's been featured in over 70 solo exhibitions. He has had his work purchased by many of the nation's leading art institutions, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Hirshhorn Museum, and the Museum of Modern Art. He has garnered critical acclaim both here and abroad. He has won a Guggenheim Fellowship and a Medal of Merit, and he's been inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. But success can corrupt, and a factor that keeps an artist vital over a long period of time in the face of overwhelmingly positive, critical, and popular approval is the constant re-engagement with ideas and aesthetics that brought him to his art in the first place. For Tom, it is the assumption that one can produce sophisticated abstract paintings that nevertheless partake of reality. Tom has said in an interview that the hardest thing he has had to do is become an older artist, someone who knows how to make a Nozkowski painting and yet keep that painting alive and vibrant. For Tom, that has been about re-engaging with his work in new ways. As he has said, as a young artist, you don't know what you're capable of. You don't know where something is going to take you. You can succeed or you can fail. But it's the process of discovery and rediscovery that one finds vitality and renewal, and that one's work is carried forward. At Rutgers, Tom stepped into a visual arts department that was in the midst of a painful transition. But he was able to handle the departmental turbulence with remarkable cool, possibly because earlier in his career he had gained unusual perspectives on life's ironies by working as head of Mad Magazine. We are delighted that he persevered through the storm at Mason Gross, and we're delighted that he's with us this afternoon in sunlight as bright and as radiant as one of his paintings. Tom, we're delighted you're giving this talk.
Thanks, George. Hi. Thank you, George. It is a pleasure being here today. I have just left 5 days of no heat, electricity, or water. It just came on last night. A little 19th century experience to make it all the more pleasurable to come here and have only minor technical glitches with the lights and the computers. Before I start this talk today, I want to tell you a little bit about what you're going to see. Can everyone hear me okay? Is this good? Yes, okay. I'm going to talk about the topic of collaboration and the solitary life in the studio, how those two things play against each other. And while I talk, I'll be showing slides of paintings from the last 2.5 years. There's no specific connection between anything that I'm going to say and what the image is on the screen, but a general sense of direction and purpose. For those of you who don't know my work, I've been working abstractly in 3 sizes for the last 35 years. Initially, a 16 by 20 inch canvas board. lately a 22 by 28 inch panel. Most of the paintings you see today will be on those panels. And then occasionally a much larger 30 by 40 inch canvas. One of the things that always strikes me when I do an artist talk like this is, you know, these big, bright, shiny things compared to what I really have created and want to be seen as a much more intimate, to involve a much more intimate kind of participation between the audience and these paintings. So as you look at these big, bright things, try to mentally ratchet them down to something that might be hanging in your bedroom or in a hallway in your own home. Okay. As I say, these paintings are all from the last 3 years, and basically from the last 2 art exhibitions I've had, one at the Pace Wildenstein Gallery in New York, and one at the Stephen Friedman Gallery in London. I don't have any photographs of work done in the last few months, so this stops sometime last spring. All right, now let's see if I can get the lights. Great. All right. Shortly after I agreed to give a talk in this lecture series, I was asked what would I talk about, the most difficult question. Typically, an artist's talk can be a fairly weary affair. Artists don't get out all that much. I'll talk more about that later. And when we do, sometimes we talk a lot, talk too much, or we can be oblivious to our audience's needs and interests. After 40 years of doing this and listening to these talks, I sometimes think that the scariest words in art school are visiting artist talks about his work at 5:30. But I do want to talk about what I do and why I do it. Is there a framework that could give my ideas some form and some backbone? One motif that always comes up when I do my talks, extemporaneous talks, is one of the key motifs, one of the key elements in the life of any artist is the solitary nature of studio practice. I'll return to this point in a few different ways later on, but it's the reality, it's the fact that a situation that generates many of the qualities that we attribute to great art and to the making of great artists. Excluding the collaborative arts, film, drama, dance, the one quality that all artists live with and that civilians, let's say, don't really appreciate are the thousands upon thousands of hours we all spend alone in our studios looking at these damn things, right? We'll get back to this. I think that, well, I graduated from Cooper Union in 1967. And let me see if I have these buttons right. Wrong way, right way, okay. I graduated from Cooper Union in 1967. And of the 100 people or so that graduated that were in my exact year, I think I'm the only one who's still functioning in the art world. And this was a very good art school today and at that time. And the reason wasn't that these people lacked the opportunities to show, many of them did, but eventually they sort of gave it up and kind of drifted away from the fine arts and became other things. They sell real estate, they write novels. They're all very happy. And when you talk to them about why they turned away from what they had been educated to do, it's sometimes, in different ways, it boils down to this kind of loneliness of the studio, of always having to fall back upon yourself and find your own resources and your own questions and your own challenges to keep going and to keep growing. In any case, if most artists labor alone for the greater parts of their careers, eventually, or often, there comes those happy moments when recognition arrives and a body of work is embraced by the public. This can happen at any point in a career, of course, and it has, I think, no connection or little connection with the overall quality and arc of the work, arc of the career. Careers can grow gradually or they can blossom overnight and are predictable only in hindsight. But when that blossoming happens, all of one's self-education, so laboriously achieved in that lonely studio, will now be supplemented with a crash course in human interaction. Now the ripe artist will be working in all sorts of interesting ways with other people, with dealers, critics, collectors, curators, writers, and so forth. Some artists handle this very well, and others, well, not so well. But there's much to learn about who we are and what our art is in how we handle these relationships. As it happens, I've been working on a few projects lately that involve different degrees of collaboration. I've been engaged in the creation of 2 artist books. I've been a visiting scholar with no defined duties at a great university. And I have worked with a curator assembling a group of my own paintings. These activities all rousted me out of my usual studio practice and put me in positions where I came to see my work in new and meaningful ways. With these experiences, I started to think about collaboration and all the different ways one works with other people in realizing ideas and making art objects. And the more I thought about it, I saw how this concept is most interesting in relationship to its opposite, to not collaborating, to going it alone. One project, a book called Flair, was completed last fall, and another book is getting underway right now here in New Brunswick at the Brodsky Center. Here at Rutgers, I'm working with the poet and my fellow Mason Gross professor, John Yao, on a book that's called Egyptian Sonnets. We started working on this, not here at Rutgers, about 4 years ago. So it's a great relief for me that we're finally getting to go to press with it and work with the collaborators here at Rutgers, a master printer named Brandy Hemminghaus, Ann McCown, the papermaker, and Lisa Switolski, the binder. But for now, let me talk about the completed book, about Flair. Flair is a collection of related poems by a woman named Cole Swenson, and it's illustrated with a suite of 10 aquatints by me. Cole and I have each worked in our usual ways, but also in response to each other's work. The most interesting and the most difficult part of this relationship came at the beginning when we sat down and spoke to each other about our usual working methods. We were meeting for the first time. We had to talk about our own solitary, non-collaborative lives, and how we would make, how she would write poems and how I would make drawings in relationship to them. Cole told me that she thought, she hadn't written any poems yet, but she thought they would probably be, in some sense, abstract, that they'd be more concerned with the sound of words and rhythms, and that in each poem, one sentence would snap into clarity. So you would have something that was concerned with just abstract feelings, a pace, a rhythm, and then a line would appear someplace in this poem. I explained my methods to her. I told her that everything I do, every painting, every drawing, all my work, comes from the real world. They have a touchstone, a core in reality. They come from things, and I mean things to be taken in the broadest possible way. Objects, ideas, moments, everything. Things in the real world. And I mean real world to be taken also in as broadly, to include both physical and speculative, imaginative realities. I try to find images in my life, things that I've heard about, things that I've experienced, things I've seen, things that have no verbal equivalence or are hard to create verbally. That's not my only criteria, but it is the one that brings forth the richest variety of shapes and colors. Henry James said that we paint because there are things that we cannot say. I've made paintings from all kinds of unlikely things. To find an unlikely source of imagery often is all I need to want to make a painting in the first place. I told Cole that I was certain I could make drawings from my experiences, which is a safe bet, and that I could think about her concept as a kind of overlay on my usual practice. The image of a broken or twisted grid is not uncommon in my recent work, as you probably have seen in some of these paintings. And I could imagine drawings that placed knots of meaning in busted systems, perhaps the visual equivalent of her concept. Over the next few months, I made 100 drawings, modest ones as well as more elaborate ones, where I collaborated with a poet who had not yet written any poems. It was kind of a solo collaboration, if it were. But eventually we had each other's work in hand, and a more conventional kind of back and forth took place. Cole's poems had a scientific bent, crystals, molecules, animals, and organs. And where my drawings referenced similar objects, we made some interesting connections. The 10 aquatints were made with my longtime collaborators and associates, the master printmakers Doris Simolenk and Chris Tsukamoto. The book has a printer, Leslie Miller, and a binder, Claudia Cohen. And I am collaborating with all these people and learning different things about my own work from each of them. We started with 9 of my most interesting recent drawings, adding only the imagery of a painting I had made a decade earlier that magically connected to Swenson's poems. We translated these images onto copper plates, reworking them, changing them, and finding printmaking equivalents for the physicality of paint and paper. Visually, some changed a little and some changed a lot, but in the deepest sense, every element changed completely. The richest part of this collaboration, of any collaboration, is the opportunity to work with new tools, new materials, and new craftspeople. Each of these areas, the printmaking, the typography, the design, and the binding, offers resistance, barriers, and obstacles to the easy flow of ideas and images. And it is important that you understand that I think this is a very good thing, that resistance. As a painter, I am at ease with my tools. I know how much sun-thickened linseed oil you need to put in paint to be able to flow an arc on a piece of Belgian linen, flow it over its bumps and grooves. I know what consistency is required to make paint run or drip or not. Burnt umber, ultramarine blue, and zinc white makes a silvery gray that practically shouts out Velasquez's name. In a lifetime of work, there are thousands, probably closer to millions of things that one finally knows how to do in your own unique way and in your own work. There's a danger, a downside to this, to that ease of production, and that is the danger of glibness, facility, and self-pastiche. Every artist I know fears this, from my graduate students to my mentors, and all of them find or found or are looking for strategies to keep themselves fresh and on edge. A new tool can do it. A new tool can be bracing. I can't casually flow an edge on an aquatint. Can't do it. Acid runs on a copper plate in a way that is quite the opposite of paint on linen. And an opaque silvery gray is just impossible with etching ink. My collaborators put me in a position where I have to rethink every part of my art making on the basic level, on the simplest possible level. The easy glyph and the elegant line must be reinvented and examined once again for their validity. And that, indeed, is a very good thing. As I go over this and talk about it now, I see that the great reward for me as an artist in collaboration is not actually the collaboration, but the opportunity to improve my own art, to turn back on myself, leaving me alone, once again, to not collaborate. When I was offered a visiting artist position at Yale, it was without any duties. I was just supposed to walk around and use the university. And I thought a little bit about this, that I would get in my car and drive for 2 hours to go to a new place where I would do exactly what I would do anywhere else, i.e. look for things that interested me and that I would want to paint. I was a little concerned about making special a process that I prefer to be mundane and even homely. When my son was about 4 years old, I took him for his first kind of hike in the woods. We live in the Hudson Valley, a ridge just west of the Hudson Valley. And went on a little walk. I probably carried him more than he walked. And towards the end of it, we ended up on a rocky kind of promontory looking out over a valley towards the Catskills with the sun setting behind them and fabulous clouds, and right out of the Hudson River School. And I turned to my son, I said, "Casimir, look at that, And he said, "Do you see the bug on the end of this stick? Look at that bug, And, this goes to the essence of human nature. You and I walk down the street, you look at one thing, I look at something else, It's basic, it's core, it's key to who we are. So as a visiting scholar, I collaborated without their knowledge with all sorts of people, curators, librarians, professors, lecturers. Each time I returned from New Haven, I would start paintings and make drawings that drew upon my experiences there. A lecture by the great David Billington from Princeton on structural engineering, in particular the bridges of Robert Maillart and the thin shell concrete structures of Felix Candela. There was another image now appearing in prints, drawings, and a painting that's in here someplace. Came from a single object in the Great New World show at the British Arts Center. A third group of drawings developed from images and ideas in a conference I sat in on something that I don't know anything about, a mask and performance from West Africa called the Baga Damba. And I would have walked out of this in 1 minute, except the first slide that came up on the screen of the mask of the Baga Damba turned out to look almost exactly like Brancusi's great wood sculpture, The Prodigal Son. So those kinds of things, to look for something that will inspire you and give you ideas for work. And I know this all sounds very high tone and refined. I mean, it was a university after all. But I started as much work at that time that came from more quotidian experiences. There is a mahogany brown, again, in one of the paintings mixed in here, that I swear to you came from the color of a bowl of a chicken chipotle chili that I ate in New Haven one day. So I found as many bugs as I found sunsets in New Haven. But then finally, there I am again, back in High Falls in my house, alone in the studio, playing out these ideas and images that I harvested from these collaborations. And I'm not collaborating. But then even alone in the studio, is that really true? All artists spend thousands of hours alone in the studio, considering their images and thinking about what they are doing. A private, hermetic, and complex discourse goes on as we explain our work to ourselves. As an artwork is created, an intricate web of associations, connections, fantasies, and commonalities grows. I put a dot of red on a canvas. It's an apple. It's a stop sign. It's the devil. It's from a Matisse. It's from a Grunwald. It's from a Rothko. Just one drop of red. Where does it take you? What size is that dash of red on this canvas? What is the scale of it? Is it a bed bug? Is it a face? Is it a beach ball or a planet? And this is in a second. This is our brain processing these images that we're creating. These associations grow wider and deeper, richer and fuller. The connections get tighter as the painting evolves. This is the crucial yet seldom considered part of every artist's experience. It is the key. And with it comes the recognition that no one else, the greatest writer, the greatest curator, the greatest critic, your best friend, your mother, no one will ever experience these works as richly as we experience them for ourselves. This complex meaning, every artist finds it. Good artists, mediocre artists, bad ones too. We all know our own work in a richness that no one else can attain. The studio can be lonely in more ways than one. And if this sounds a little bleak, don't worry, it isn't. In a minute, I'll circle back to this place. When I was first starting to paint the way you see here, my wife and I went to Europe for the first time. It was in 1971 or 1972, I'm not sure. And as we traveled through Italy and France and England, I was looking for paintings and ways of working, ways of thinking about painting that could be meaningful in understanding what I was trying to do. I knew I wanted to work these small sizes. I knew I wanted to root my paintings in reality. What was out there that was relevant to this kind of a project? I mean, I guess in some sense everything was relevant to this project, but what could I really narrow in on? Well, I saw a lot of things, notably Trecento Sienese painting, the first panel paintings made in the Western world. Those were really very important and really essential to me. But it was in the National Gallery in London that I had my most intense experience. And it was there that I saw Pisanello's Vision of St. Eustache for the first time. This is a painting about the size of these paintings in that 22 by 28 inch range. Actually, I see it's 22 by 26 inches, exactly. It depicts a Roman nobleman on a horse. This is a late Gothic painting, early Renaissance, and the horse is fabulous. The name of the nobleman is Placidus. He is a member of Trajan's court, and this is one of these apocryphal saints that's been kind of taken out of the book, and we know about it from a great Renaissance book called The Golden Legend. Anyway, his name is Placidus, and he's a member of Trajan's court. He's known for his generosity and his good works. He's a great hunter. He's out hunting, as he does every day, with his dogs and his horse, and at this moment they've been stopped dead in their tracks. A stag has appeared before them with a crucifix between its horns. The stag speaks in Jesus' voice and says, "I am what you are really hunting for." The stag says, "And I have been hunting for you." Placidus converts to Christianity. He changes his name to Eustache. He gives away his money to the poor. It was painted around 1440, more Gothic than Renaissance, and it's composed something like a tapestry, with objects, animals, plants, and landforms flattened and arranged in tiers above and around our fine volumetric night. Almost the only thing in the painting that is not presented flat and in Egyptian profile is the crucifix, shown at an oblique angle cast into three-dimensional space between the stag's antlers. The forest is dark, although this may be as much from the darkening of the paint as by Pisanello's invention. And that darkness seems psychologically right for this story. By the way, the Eustache legend, and some of you may be thinking of this, it's often confused with the story of Saint Hubert, another saint who's been removed from the book. See Dura's great woodcut of Saint Hubert. Both have this same central scene of the hunter being faced with a stag with the crucifix between its antlers. But Hubert's story is every bit as violent and bloody as Eustache's is calm and loving. And one more turn of this, Flaubert's great short story, The Legend of St. Julian the Hospitaller, is the same story again. Flaubert drew that, to make the connection back to visual art, he drew that from the stained glass window at Chartres of this saint. And he wanted to write a story that had bright colors, was what he said. And there the stag, this time, curses St. Eustache in the bloodiest version of all three stories. I know I'm digressing a lot on this, but I've always been fascinated. What's with all these talking deer, It must be some kind of Neolithic memory from prehistoric times. Anyway, I had one of those extraordinary moments in front of this painting, and we've all had this experience where something touches you so deeply and so intensely. You feel a connection that's beyond rationality. You feel like, my God, I could have done this. This is mine. I own this thing. I understand it totally. It speaks directly to me. It is profoundly mine. Well, sure it is. And in fact, when I returned to New York, I spent the next few months trying to mine this particular painting, to dig into it and to take its colors, its shapes, its power, and make them my own. I was collaborating with Pisanello, wasn't I? At least I was stealing from him, and that's a kind of collaboration. If a certain form or a disc of color could move me to tears in London, why why not repeat that shape, that color in New York City and get the same effect? Well, lots of luck. I mean, you all know where this is going. I learned quickly that it can't be done. The integrity of Pisanello's masterpiece lies in its union of form and meaning. And by meaning, I'm thinking of Pisanello's unique desire to paint this one picture, his need to possess the world in exactly this way. If there is a mechanics to the meaning I'm talking about here, it would be found in the direction of his gaze and in the tells of his hand, stuff you could never duplicate. The right shape and the right color, the right scale and the right proportions, the right position and the right moment can make an event happen on a flat surface. An event that is as intense, as sometimes for me anyway, more intense than anything in reality. On Ascension Day in Venice, the Doge goes out in a gondola into the middle of the bay, the bacino in front of St. Mark's, and he throws a gold ring into the ocean, and he says in Latin, "With this ring I wed the sea." They did this for centuries. Voltaire was present for one of these events, and afterwards he said he thought it wasn't a legal marriage because the sea hadn't given her consent. In that sense, I suppose my collaboration with Pisanello was illicit, although artists, even the great Voltaire, do this all the time. Our collaborations across times and cultures are the clearest sign of the power of art. I have a thimbleful of knowledge about, say, Song Dynasty paintings, or the culture of the Ife, or of the Byzantine Empire. But the artwork of these people speaks to me as clearly as anything I know. I've collaborated with the artists of all these cultures. But what exactly did I see to collaborate with? We can go back now to think about those thousands of hours spent alone in the studio. How could one ever express all those reflections, connections, observations, judgments, and fantasies that drift across an artist's mind as she works? Solitary, solo, and certainly not collaborating. The web of associations is so rich and so dense, no one else can have it. Okay. I believe, finally, we really admire only one thing in a work of art, and that is the shock of recognition that another human being could create this thing in all of its depth and complexity. We admire this kind of vision of a parallel world. We admire the rigor of an artist's analysis and the richness of their perceptions. There is no other way to explain how we can come to appreciate artworks that stretch out and touch us across 30,000 years of time and from every different kind of culture. What we do see and what we do understand is the one thing I believe a work of art can express, that another human being did this, that another person could imagine something so richly and so deeply. And this recognition shatters the loneliness of the studio. Edward Dahlberg quotes Cardinal Newman's motto, "Heart speaketh to heart." The third collaboration worth talking about is the way I've been able to work recently with a curator. About 2 years ago, I renovated my studio. I tripled its size, and I added to it all the modern conveniences like heat, humidity, electricity, all those good things, and lots of adequate storage and good lighting. A great curator of contemporary art was kind enough to come to that studio right after it was finished and to look through the mass of older work that was now, for the first time in my life, all at hand in one place and all accessible. I feel a little sorry for her because there was, as you might expect, a lot of chaff to winnow through, apprentice work, missteps, odd experiments, what have you. But she soldiered through it and pulled together a group of paintings that made sense, that belonged together, and had an interesting conversation with each other. I am much too close to these paintings to ever be able to see them clearly. They're tied too closely to my life, to my home, my family, and all sorts of ephemeral daily stuff. But the curator could bring clear thought and a fresh eye and become another kind of collaborator. Looking at older work is daunting. I avoid it as much as I can. It's very hard, I think, for any artist. Sometimes we believe this might be a trap, a way to rest on our laurels and to savor old victories instead of finding new ones. I was going to do the thing that George quoted about how hard it is to become an older painter. So let me move on. Don't want to make anybody cry in the audience. I once gave a talk where I went off on that riff at Skowhegan, and Amy Stillman was in the audience and yelled up from the audience. She said, "Give us a break, you know, why are you going on about that? We're all getting old." Okay, so the curator, after a number of visits over the last summer, finally leaves. And I'm sitting alone in my studio looking at a dozen paintings, mostly from the 1970s, arranged against a wall. I'm thinking about them and all the places these images took me. I'm thinking about what I didn't know then and what I do know now. I'm thinking about what it means to spend your life as an artist, and I am not collaborating. Until I start to make a painting that is based on the idea of one of these old paintings from the 1970s. And I realize I'm collaborating again, this time with my younger self. I finished that painting just a few months ago, by the way. Don't have a photo yet, alas. It might even still be wet. And I doubt that anyone else could easily see how it connects back over those 40 years. But I do, and I find that very satisfying. I once was asked who was the ideal audience for my work. And I replied, myself when I was 17. And there in the studio, collaborating and not collaborating, I've come very close to closing that circle. I'd love to take questions. While I wait for some questions, one question that often comes up is why the small sizes? You know, I spoke at the very beginning of this talk that I've restricted myself to 3 smallish formats. And the reason for that, I think, lies rooted in the politics of the 1960s when I went to art school. And if you want to understand artists of my generation, I think you really have to factor in the political nature of that experience. It was the time of the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the early days of feminism. You know, politics was the water we swam in, and it educated us in a certain way. But the paintings we were doing, and I speak, you know, for most of my brothers and sisters, the paintings we were doing tended to be somewhat formal, somewhat bound by an attitude that paintings had to be very large, they had to be kind of cooled down a little bit. We were working our way out of abstract expressionism and all of that kind of emotional, what seemed at the time to be emotional excess. And we were all looking for strategies to kind of get past that. The paintings I did in art school were very, very large. They were 90 by 110 inches routinely. And they were part of a kind of painting called systemic painting, where one would imagine rules and then follow them through to create a work. I became more and more dissatisfied with that kind of painting, which finally seemed to me to be aimed at the very institutions, museums, rich people, bank lobbies. You know, where do you put a giant painting? You know, and I decided I would do only paintings that would fit into the tenement apartments of my friends, something that could be lived with rather than confronted with. I don't think that's politically a very sophisticated argument for why one would want to do small paintings, and I don't think I would have stuck to it, except one thing happened, one thing came out of that simple idea, and it was this. When I did very large paintings, I'd have an idea. Let's make the background blue. And, you know, you take your brush and you start working away at it. It might be like 3 days' work to actually get there, and all the artists here know this experience, to get to that point where you can actually see it. And you look at it, you go like, oh my God, that stinks. And then it's 3 days' work to take it away, to get rid of it. Once I made that decision to work small, I could take a paint rag, I could do anything. Any idea, no matter how capricious, I could put it down on the canvas. If it didn't work, didn't look good, wipe it off, try something else. And serendipitously, in the first year I started painting this way, I covered more ground than I had in what amounted to 6 years of art school. So that was liberating, and that was one of the great reasons for why I continued to make, to this day, to make small-scale paintings. Yes?
I'm very interested in the tension between the solitary nature of work and the collaboration, and thank you for your talk.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more from a developmental perspective in your own career.
Yes.
Were there times when the solitary work was what you needed in your own development, and there was other times when you needed to get out
Mm-hmm.
and work together?
Sure. It is the nature of the art world, of the visual art world, that we generally don't have much of a choice about when our career is going to be a solitary one, and when we're going to have the opportunities to collaborate with other people, certainly on some levels. Every artist knows, when they need to be alone, I think. It's when you need to have people with you, and you need to be in the discourse to get your work out into the world. That's often a very difficult and fraught step to make, and again, often out of our hands. So there is an involuntary aspect to all of this that drives it. Yeah. Yes, Dennis.
Considering your recent success, it's been long-standing, but it's been picking up. How do you keep your work methods balanced against the overwhelming demand for anything you paint?
Yeah, I think it would have been difficult, perhaps earlier in my life, but at this point, my wife will tell you it would take a crowbar to get me to change anything, in how I work and what I do. I've produced exactly the same number of paintings every year since probably 1980, within a tiny range. So yeah, it hasn't been the problem I might have imagined it would have been. It's good to be stubborn sometimes. Yes?
You earlier drew the distinction between the kinds of collaboration you've described with other paintings, and then more recently with poet and bookmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And you asked us to distinguish this kind of collaboration from the collaboration that one finds in the performed arts.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you would think out loud about that a little bit more, and whether you want to.
Sure. Normally, if I was doing a more extemporaneous talk, I would very simply say that all artists know this solitude and know the qualities that come out of it, what develops from that position. But I do think there's something different with, a musician will be alone practicing, but perhaps finally the apotheosis is to be in the orchestra and to have the symphony played, But a composer would live the same life, I think, that a visual artist would. Actors, perhaps they're the ones who most need collaborators. Yeah. Yes, Diane.
Tom, you're talking about collaboration in kind of a loose and generous way, as opposed to, say, joint authorship
Yeah.
or something. That, kind of collaboration maybe two jazz musicians where you're equally
Mm-hmm.
authors to it. But I'm wondering if you can extend the idea of collaboration into the realm of art education, both from your experience as a student and now as a faculty member, and maybe wondering about what goes on with students today. I'm interested in that collaboration.
Yeah. I think I like teaching very much because it does allow me to think about art in ways that are analogous to my own experience of this, to live vicariously problems that now I don't have to deal with, How do you make a figurative painting? How do you do whatever it is. I like that quite a bit. I'll tell you one story. When I first came to Rutgers, my first year here, I had I guess the first semester I only had 2 classes. One was an undergraduate painting class, a beginning painting class. And I had 20 students. And I decided that I would make an oil on paper, a painting not only in some way about each student, but about what their ideas about painting were. And it was an interesting project. I only got 3 people done before I gave up on it. But one of the privileges of the studio is you get to do that too, just don't tell people what you're after. But no, I think actually that may be the richest kind of collaboration, to really be with other artists and to talk about your work, their work, the problems that you both share. I think that's great. Okay. Another question? Yes? Cross-hatching. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can talk about that. It's going to take me a minute to kind of circle to it. All right, every painting I do comes from something in the real world, right? And I try to imagine difficult and improbable sources, like, for example, my students and their ways of painting and how that might make another painting. I believe if you can imagine a problem, you can imagine a solution. Now, it might not be the right solution. It might be provisional. It might be temporary. It'll be the best you can do, the furthest you can go to solving that problem. Okay, whether it's in a painting, in life, in anything else, you take a stab at it. You go as far as you can go. Sometimes my paintings take years to finish. It's a little better now, but in my first 20 shows, let's say, there were some paintings that had maybe 10, 15 years of work in them before they finally actually got finished and up on the wall. Technically, this represents a great problem, and that is paint dries, and it doesn't like to be painted on top of. It cracks, it does all kinds of terrible things. So my studio practice has always been, if a painting is not sticky, if it's been sitting on the side for a while, to take a palette knife and scrape it all off when I go back to it. Or take a rag soaked in turpentine and rub it down. Or cover it with a wash of color so that everything is put back into question. My teachers were abstract expressionists, and one of the cardinal ideas was no tinkering. This machine is complete. Everything affects everything else. So these surfaces would often get reinvigorated and totally obliterated, covered. Something awful would happen to them, and then I would go back in and bring the painting back. Many of the same forms would come back, but they'd have to go through this kind of purging process. And in fact, this painting, very quickly had transparent layers of, a transparent red just kind of squished all over everything. And then maybe parts were wiped away or filled in over those egg-like shapes. I'm pretty sure. And the cross-hatching that you see was another, it came out as drawings before it was in paintings, and it was a graphic way to reproduce these washes of color, these kind of screens of color or scraping, right? And it's like eating salted peanuts. Once you start doing something like that, you just keep going. Okay, another question. Okay, yes, Eric.
Just keep in mind, when you're talking about collaboration, it's kind of a lot of looking at something and taking something in and accepting it.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times in your work, it seems like you're always not always accepting something. Either you've accepted something and now you're choosing to fight against it.
Right.
Is there another level to that, like a secondary level that gets down to really working from?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm not completely sure I understand you, but let's see if this answers your question. And it also goes back to my answer to Diane's question. And that is, in the studio, you're really free. I mean, freedom is really important. And the idea that for the first time in art history, we are artists who are allowed to do anything we want to do, right? And there will be an audience out there, an intelligent, motivated audience that will try very hard to play our game and to see it the way we see it. This has never happened before in the history of art. And I hope we're all taking advantage of it while it lasts. But I think we have the privilege to do whatever we want, to be as free as we want to be in the studio. And for me, I don't want to create my own prison. I don't want to create a system that will keep me from doing something on the whim of a moment, And I feel no moral obligation, let's say, to kind of stick to one idea through a painting, one process idea through a painting, but in fact allow myself to shift gears, change methods, change everything except that central initial kernel that has created the painting in the first place, has started the painting in the first place. So if that answers your question, that's my answer. Okay. Let me and oh yes, please. Yes, I mean patterns develop all the time, and I try to resist them. In other words, I don't want to. This is going to sound like I want to be miserable. I don't want to be miserable, but I don't want to be in a comfort zone where I can do these things, easily. I find a challenge much more rewarding in the studio. I am the happiest in my studio when I can't do something and it's driving me crazy. When I can't find, let's face it, as artists, we have to ask crazy questions. Like, what is the color of an emotion? What is the shape of an idea? This is nuts, But it's a project that most of us touch on someplace in our work, right? And I think that's, the gravy. That's the good stuff. That's, where we discover new things about the world and about ourselves, and about why we wanted to look at something in the first place. I think that's important. That's an important part of our own growth and self-understanding. Another question? Okay, I wanted to end up with just a little coda at the end of this talk, and it is this. I think you should be very careful when you listen to artists speak, very careful in believing what they have to say about their own work. And I don't mean to suggest that anyone intends to mislead or to be purposefully obscure. It's quite the contrary, I think. I think every artist wants to kind of, somehow get it out there. But I think if an artist is any good, she's probably working 4 or 5 years ahead of her words, That in her studio, in the practice, they're doing this, they haven't yet found visual ways of saying it. In my own experience, 3 years, 4 years, something like that. And even to the point where I find that if I find myself being able easily to talk about my work, I worry that, maybe it's too easy, it's too glib. Step back and do something harder, do something more demanding. I have a bunch more paintings left. Should we just run through those? And if anybody has a question, we'll do it. If not, we'll just finish up with these paintings. One of the nice things about working with a touchstone in reality is that it freely pursued, it will generate all kinds of possibilities, all kinds of possible ideas. And in some way, when I'm stuck with a painting, again, as I said before, I can't push something forward, one of the nice things about, this place in reality is that you can, metaphorically move away from it, move around it, look at it in a different way. What happens at a different time of day, a different, all the qualities of the world can be brought to bear on this thing, this place, this idea, this emotion. Yes? Never. No, you know, I've tried a bunch of different ways to deal with this because my 1960s politics would say, you know, you really do have to be able to talk to this. Why are you being coy? Why so shy about this? And the reality is that, you know, the sources of these things tends to be banal, you know. Early on when I first did them, I tried to give these paintings honest titles, you know. The brown cow, right? And I've never done a brown cow. And people would go and look at it and they'd scratch their heads and say, well, you know, maybe that's an udder upside down, I don't know. You know, and it would create a prison for them. That, again, I think freedom is the issue. And as I said in my talk, I don't think anybody can really get to what any artist has inside these pieces, you know? And I think it's better that they feel free to kind of pursue their own ideas and their own, find their own correlatives in the visual continuum in these paintings, in any paintings. And that's why all my paintings are untitled. I don't think I said this. I probably should have. We're alternating oils on panel and oils on paper. Yes?
Experience where a musician or an artist or dancer would work collaboration with your art at the moment?
Yeah. I have seen it done. My wife actually has worked with musicians and dancers. Boy, it scares me, you know. I like being able to turn my canvas to the wall and you know, go read a book when I'm having problems. So that kind of collaboration where other people, where I'm responsible to other people, hard for me, very hard for me. Yes. Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's my goal, you know? Yeah, no, I want to be surprised in the studio. I don't like factory work, you know? I want to be startled. And you know, I mean, people say, you know, how do you know when a painting's done, right? And you know, for me, it's when I understand why I wanted to do it in the first place, you know? And that's usually shocking in some ways, you know? Holy smokes, you know, that's what I really saw in that moment, you know? That's what I desired, right? I think we have 4 drawings in a row here, maybe, that all go to the same. I should say very quickly one thing. These drawings, these oils on paper, are done in parallel to my paintings. And I told you about the process where I scrape things down or rub them off. And if you think about it, you realize I lose a lot of stuff. And I often lose things that are in some way worthwhile, I think are beautiful. And so what I do in the studio is next to my easel, I keep sheets of Stonehenge, which is a nice heavy printmaking paper, pinned on the walls. And if I'm about to lose something that I think is worth saving, I'll take the paint on the palette and go and do an oil on paper that tries to preserve that idea. And I think we have 4 drawings in a row here that all come from the same painting that I think still isn't finished. Let's see if I'm right. Yes. Now, again, what you should look for, well, you'll see the commonalities. So 1, 2, 3. Maybe one more? Yes. And atypically, here come 4 that are very closely related. Very close. Something I never do, and that's the reason I did it. And the last slide. Thanks. Thank you.